Hello. This is my personal list of my top 5 dragons from TV, film, and animation. I'm going to start my list with the honourable mentions. I'll mention my top 5 first, actually. I'll mention, in 5th place, I have Drogon from Game of Thrones. In 4th place, I have Vhagar from House of the Dragon. 3rd place, I have Toothless from How to Train Your Dragon. In 2nd place, I have Smaug from the Hobbit trilogy, and in 1st place I have the Hungarian Horntail from Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. I'm going to mention a few honourable mentions. Viserion and Rhaegal from Game of Thrones. The Red Eyes Black Dragon, the Blue Eyes White Dragon, the Slifer the Sky Dragon, and the Winged Dragon of Ra from Yu-Gi-Oh! The animation, the TV show, the Japanese TV show. And then I'm also going to mention the dragon that we see in the Deathly Hallows. I can't remember if it's part 1 or part 2, but it's the dragon that Harry, Ron, and Hermione escape on. And that dragon was fantastic. I really, really like that dragon, and I was considering actually putting that dragon on my top 5 list, but I'm going to keep my top 5 the way they are. I'm going to start with number 5 and work my way up to number 1, and I'm going to explain my reasons for why I've placed each of these dragons on my list. Number 5, Drogon from Game of Thrones. I love the design for this dragon. I love the sound of him. I thought that the scenes that he had on screen were excellent. I thought the scene where he had an interaction with Jon Snow, and I'm pretty sure they actually used a real life practical effect to mimic his teeth in his head when you see Jon Snow interacting with him in season 7. I thought that was fantastic. I loved the design. I loved that look for that dragon. I thought he was just fantastic. That was Daenerys's favourite dragon to ride on top of. He was a great dragon. And obviously the name is derived from Khal Drogo, Jason Momoa's character, Drogon. I thought that was nice. I thought that was a nice way for her to pay tribute to her late husband in the earlier seasons, and I think that dragon was that is my favourite dragon from Game of Thrones. But I would say that in number 4th place would be Vhagar from House of the Dragon. Obviously the prequel series to Game of Thrones. Vhagar to me was fantastic. He stood out, or she stood out, sorry, compared to all the other dragons. I feel like the design I feel like that dragon just looked completely different, not just because of its size, but like the way that its neck was sagging. You could clearly tell that this dragon's seen mileage. This dragon's been around for a while. This dragon is older in years. I thought Vhagar's scene at the end when you see her interacting with Rhaenyra's son's dragon at the finale of House of the Dragon season 1, that was just fantastic for the character of for Vhagar. Obviously, that's all I'm meaning. Not meaning I'm loving what's happening to the characters or anything like that. Just Vhagar on screen. I loved those scenes. I loved any scene with Vhagar. Vhagar stood out. I can't remember really any of the other dragons' names in House of the Dragon. Maybe one, but I think I might be wrong about it. Vhagar just stole the show, and I think maybe also because that dragon had time with Balerion. We've not seen a live action Balerion yet, but Vhagar to me was just fantastic. Number 3, I would say Toothless, How to Train Your Dragon trilogy. Toothless to me would probably be the dragon that I would say feels the most personal. The dragon that you feel like you felt the greatest connection, what I felt the personal greatest connection with, I would say, because it felt like Hiccup was interacting with a dog, and the apprehension that Gerard Butler's character feels when first coming across Hiccup, and then you see all the other dragons and you see Hiccup going toe to toe with the other dragons. And I thought the design was fantastic. I love the fact that he was different in that he at first, when you first interact with him, that was completely different from what the Vikings had expected from dragons. He was different in that he was so much more playful. He was the original dragon that started the bond between the Vikings and their dragons that we see throughout the trilogy. I'm a big fan of the trilogy, and Toothless was just fantastic. I liked him overall. I'll say again, he was probably the most personal dragon. Liked the design. Liked when he would shoot fire. The way that he did, that was fantastic. 2nd place, I have Smaug from the Hobbit trilogy. Peter Jackson's Hobbit trilogy, played by Benedict Cumberbatch. I would say that this dragon, to me, I would say it was just this dragon once again. The biggest difference between this dragon and the other dragons is obviously this dragon talks. This dragon's got the ability to speak, played brilliantly by Benedict Cumberbatch. The voice work here was fantastic, and the fact that they managed to work in motion capture was also solid. I loved the design. I loved his long neck. I loved the way that he emerges from the castle, the way that he talks with Martin Freeman. That scene was fantastic. I would say that probably my favourite part about Smaug, my favourite aspect of Smaug in the Hobbit trilogy is his death scene. And here's why. It felt like a human death scene. It made it feel a little bit more relatable, if you will, in that Smaug's death, when he's flying up, he was flying ever higher up towards the clouds. It felt as if it was a human in a swimming pool or a human in a river struggling to get to the surface to gasp for air. I think that's what was, when I first watched it, that was what first came to my mind. It was almost as if he was underneath water and he was struggling to breathe and he was just trying to get to the surface, but he fails, and then you see him falling to the sky, and this just made it feel more real. This made it just feel that extra layer of like wow, like this dragon exists. When this dragon dies, it wasn't like Viserion and Rhaegal, if you will, in Game of Thrones. When they died, there was obviously an impact, but when Smaug dies, his fall to him landing on the villagers, it just added to that realism. I'll use that word. I think that's the best way to describe my feelings about Smaug's death and why it felt more impactful. It was the realism in that you could almost compare it to a plane falling out from the sky, if you will, like how it impacted the local villagers. I thought it was just great. I loved the design for Smaug. I thought the neck differentiated it from other dragons. And Benedict Cumberbatch was excellent with this role. And then, of course, I'm going to have number one, my personal favourite dragon, the Hungarian Horntail from Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. This dragon, to me, I think the biggest positive would be that the visual effects are 20 years old and it still stands up. I'd still actually say it's better than Drogon, Vhagar, Smaug, or the dragon that I mentioned from the Deathly Hallows when Harry, Ron and Hermione escape. The visual effects for the Hungarian Horntail were just superb. It's a bit breathtaking. It takes my breath away personally that it's 20 years old. 2005 it came out. It's nearly 20 years old. And they're still that good. They can still hold up. And I think that's just fantastic. I thought the design for the dragon and the sound design when he does his roar at the top of the castle, that was fantastic. I love the twin fire that he does when you see him in the arena with Harry. I love the fact that he shoots fire, and it's not like it's Drogon or Smaug or any of the other, or Toothless, in that he produces one source of fire. With the Hungarian Horntail, there's twin sources of fire. There's two different sources of fire, and that just made the dragon different in its own way. Once again, I loved the design. The death scene, I would say I preferred Smaug's death scene, but the Hungarian Horntail chasing after Harry, and then you see him on top of one of the Hogwarts towers, and you see him walking around the building. That was just fantastic. That really, once again, I know I said this about Smaug, but that added to the realism that the dragon was being hampered by the wind and he had to try and land before jumping from tower to tower before getting onto the same tower as Harry, and then trying to make its move and attempting to kill Harry and then chasing him on his broomstick. Just fantastic. I'll say again, my list was 5th place, Drogon, Game of Thrones, Vhagar, House of the Dragon. 3rd place was Toothless in How to Train Your Dragon trilogy. 2nd place was Smaug and from the Hobbit trilogy, and 1st place was the Hungarian Horntail. That's my top 5 list. Thanks for watching.